Good morning, everyone. My name is Doriana Chirico, and I'm part of University of Sassari team. Today, I'm with Sabela Oubiña Barbolla, Associate Professor of Procedural Law at Autonomous University of Madrid. Good morning, Sabela, and coordinator of the UAM team of Retreat. Today, she will describe us one of the most important deliverables of the Retreat project, so the International Comparative Report. Good morning, Isabella. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Doriana. I would like to thank you for inviting me here today to share some of the results of this transnational report on sexual crimes, victims, and criminal proceedings in Southern Europe.
Okay, so let's start with the question. Some project partners countries, Spain, Italy, Greece, have in the previous months worked on the national reports on the current situation regarding the treatment received by victims of sexual violence within their legal system. Which needs did this idea of a transnational report arise from? Which needs of professionals and societies does it aims to address?
Well, before I turn to your question, let me remind the listeners here about the overall aim of our European project. Retreat wants to boost changes in criminal justice system in these countries to improve their responsiveness to the particular needs of victims of sexual crimes. The Victim Rights Directive of 2012 envisaged an individual assessment for all victims, considering personal characteristics, the nature, and the special circumstances of the crime. And we do not have to forget that the law expressly mentions sexual violence. Therefore, Retreat reports, the national ones, and in this case, the transnational, go through the question of how well do criminal justice systems treat victims of sexual violence in these countries. The answer is not only important to survivors, it also sends a message to professionals involved and to society on how should sexual violence be viewed. As you said, Retreat Greek, Italian, and Spanish partners in this project were very hard to present these country reports, identifying the state of practice at intra or at national level. We highly recommend the readings. The transnational report tends to go beyond their internal borders and provide a wider picture on the drawbacks faced by victims of sexual crimes.
What do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses of transnational comparative report?
As I advance, this transnational report is a comparative study, and it has been prepared from the information of these previous country reports, the Greek, the Italian, and the Spanish report. As you can imagine, the integration of the information from each national report was not always easy. To be sincere, sometimes information obtained is very interesting from a national point of view, but it was not directly comparable. But no one said it will be easy to write a transnational report on this topic. In fact, this is a relatively common phenomenon in this type of research that want to focus more in the law in action than in the law in books. However, to add some empirical data, qualitative or quantitative, on criminal justice system in a specific area, here, for example, sexual victims, is more difficult in some countries than another. The level of accessibility to experts, to statistical data, even to access the case law is quite diverse. If we add COVID to this scenario, we must recognize that it has been very, very complex, a big challenge to the partners to produce the country reports. They try very hard to increase the interviews to judges, prosecutors, lawyers, police officers, health staff, victims service support, and even when it's possible, direct victims. But again, not all professionals had this availability and perhaps the mood in this difficult COVID era. The fact is that, again, the number of interviews, the area of the expertise, and the fruitfulness of the information obtained varied significantly from one to another country report. After the aforementioned handicaps, it might surprise the listeners that I can say that the comparative report has some strengths, value, or merits. But the truth is that we are very happy and proud with the result. It has obviously weakness, as I said, but also a strength. It is a very complete and balanced report of these criminal justice systems. And what makes this transnational report worth reading? It gives a very good panoramic picture of the evolution of sexual crimes in this country and the challenges that victims of sexual crimes face before, during, and after criminal proceeding in Greece, Italy, and Spain, according to what are those ideal standards of the Istanbul Convention and the European Directive on Victims' Rights.
And how similar are the three analyzed legal system, and what are the most important differences?
My dear Diana, I don't want to spoil the transnational report, so if you let me, I will only mention some of these similarities and differences and let some mystery for readers to check and deepen themselves. So I'm only going to mention some of the issues related to substantive criminal law and procedural organizational ones. From a substantive criminal point of view, for example, the three legal systems had experienced a general similar evolution. There has been a paradigm shift from the protection of the prevailing sexual morality in our societies to a current effective protection of our individual sexual freedom. However, this radical change came at different time. In Italy and in Spain, by far before than in Greece, where this development took place very recently. There are a divergence on the concept of sexual violence as a gender-based violence, because the Spanish criminal law has a narrow concept of gender violence limited to the violence which take place in a family domestic context and not outside that space. This is why in Spain, victims of sexual crimes complain of a certain invisibility compared to victims of gender-based violence. There are some differences on the age from which it is recognized that a person can validly consent to a sexual relation in full exercise of his or her autonomy. The Spanish law stands out the most conservative. However, the three legislators have adopted Romeo and Juliet clauses, but each country has done so in its own way. A comparison of the scale of penalties is very complicated, but it seems clear that in recent years, there has been an increase of the severity of this kind of offenses. Generally speaking, the three systems configure as sexual offenses as a sort of intermediate category between public and private crimes. The biggest differences lies in the effectiveness of a victim intervention after the start of the procedure. If we move to procedural and organizational issues on the treatment of the victim of sexual violence from a directive perspective regarding the right to be informed, despite the progress made in the recent years and a growing interest of the different professionals to make information more accessible, this is an aspect that needs to be improved in the three systems. Unfortunately, our criminal justice system shared a great discrepancy in the information offered and received by the victim, as well as in relation to the right to be listened. I mean, between the way in which professionals claim to act and the opinion of the victim. Somehow, the professional admit that this step is in practice reduced to a mere formality. Generally, this provokes great uncertainty and insecurity in the victims, very tools at all stages, but especially in the initial ones. Sometimes the situation improves if he or she receives legal aid. But however, again, there are discrepancies in that right among the three countries. While Italy guaranteed the right to legal aid of victims of sexual crimes, this is not always the case in Spain. The three reports drafted a mixed picture of the right to report a person of the same sex. In practice, the victim does not seem to receive the information and to exercise this right in Italy and Greece. The lack of an effective information and listening, as well as an appropriate treatment, results in the three countries from an insufficient training of several professionals: police, prosecutor, judges, lawyers. Both victims and professionals interviewed highlight the need for specific training, which focus on victims' interests and eliminates myths and prejudices associated to this kind of crimes. The lack of training varies significantly from one country to another. However, the lack of human resources and the workload are always the justification for all professionals of not being able to assist victims adequately. The three criminal justice systems need to improve the communication techniques and the tools used in the different phases. In all countries, there is a variation across the same country. For example, urban and rural areas, poor and rich regions, despite being all victims of sexual violence. Therefore, it's necessary to agree on standardized protocols and guarantee their widespread application so that all victims are equally granted their rights to an integrated protection. Sometimes the protocol exists, but the professionals do not know them or put on practice. There are victim support services with a greater or lesser degree of specialization in sexual violence in all three countries. However, they are very far from meeting all the needs for sexual victims. Furthermore, there are significant differences in terms of access to support and the multidisciplinary nature of the support between rural and urban areas. It is important to grant victims access to support even after a criminal proceeding, as well as in cases of non-reported and prescribed offenses. Related to the environment, in broad terms, we can say that police stations, judicial bodies, public offices are not adequately prepared to receive sexual victims. They are not welcoming and do not include spaces specifically prepared to assist victims. But the state of this infrastructure varies significantly between one country and another. Discrepancies appears also among the three countries with respect to the measures to avoid visual contact between victims and offenders. While these measures are generally applied to child victims, their application to adult victims is still rare. Most adult victims in this country have to testify during the trial in the same courtroom, adopting simple physical protection measures rather than using better technological solutions such as a video conference from another room. Time is another common variable that negatively affects the protection, safety, and dignity of the victims in all three countries. Criminal procedure can last for years. The management of cases need to be sped up. There are only a few details of the content of this transnational report. Let me insist and suggest citizen, researcher, or professional who wants to know more that they can freely request from our website, sexualviolencejustice.eu, a comprehensive report which includes this transnational report written by the Autonomous University of Madrid, as well as an incredible report about the best and promising practices coordinated by our colleague Monique Anderson from the Catholic University of Leuven.
Perfect, thank you. And how can it be useful for professionals working with victims and possibly for the victims themselves?
Well, we really hope it will be helpful in general to anyone. The transnational report tends to identify the barriers and pain points faced by these victims, caused directly and sometimes indirectly by criminal justice systems. I mean, the design, the lack of infrastructure, professional involved, resources, etc. So it looks for a better and more coherent and efficient implementation of the Victims Directive in regard to the specific needs of a sexual victim. We try to alert and explain public authorities on the importance of care in the manner in which a victim of sexual violence is treated during all stages of the criminal proceeding, and highlight the relevance to invest and increase the capacity of all professionals to reduce the secondary victimization of these victims. And of course, to improve the public awareness and knowledge about the rights of these victims.
And how do you think the conclusion of the paper can be summarized in few points, in a few pills?
Well, more than a few pills, I will finish with some reflections. First, there are two gaps between the law in the books and the law in action in the three countries. One between the standards, international and European, and the national law, our hard or soft law, but there is a greater gap between the norm and its practical application. Obviously, these gaps are deeper in some countries than in others. It's perhaps more similar in Italy and Spain, with all exceptions, than in Greece. Secondly, legal changes are still necessary in the three countries to adapt and implement our legal system to international and European standards. But legal changes on paper are useless if they are not applied. Improving the treatment of sexual victims in our criminal justice systems mainly involves some changes in the design, in the infrastructures and resources, but above all, training and awareness of all the professionals involved. Here is where there is the paradigm shift for the reshaped treatment of sexual victims during criminal proceedings. And finally, in this sense, there is a certain confusion on or misinterpretation on the protection of victims and the accused rights as if they were incompatible goals for the professionals when they are not. The criminal proceeding can treat adequately a sexual victim while guarantee the accused's fundamental rights. Thank you, Doriana.
Thank you, Sabela, for being here today and to accept our interview. So have a nice day and a nice vacation for this summer.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.